we talk about overpopulation. So we were kind of mentioning it earlier. There, overpopulation is one of the biggest things that I have kind of looked into for longevity, because I've had people tell me that it's immoral to want to live longer because of this reason alone, is that we're being overpopulated. And the more that I looked into it, I used to think there was an overpopulation problem. And I don't know if you have any opinions about if you think there is one or not. Do you feel like there is, or have you looked into that much?
I don't think there is, but I base that opinion on, I believe technology will keep getting better. It will keep the pace of what we need as civilization. So I've read and studied some different things on overpopulation, probably not as much as you have, but just I've always came to the conclusion from everything I've consumed of we will have the tools to deal with any kind of these problems like that, the human resource problems. I think we'll have the tools to deal with in the future, at least in like the Western world. I would say, maybe there'll be pockets of problems in other parts of the world that are harder to solve, but I think a lot of nations will have the tools to deal with it. I think a lot of people base you hear people base their decision to have kids or not based on overpopulation. It always confused me. I was always like, to me, it's like, do you want to see your bloodline going longer? I'm kind of overgeneralizing. I know there's a lot of people who have, everyone makes their own choices. I'm not saying anyone should or shouldn't have kids or anything like that. I'm just saying basing overpopulation as your reason for not having more kids. You don't want to selfishly keep taking the resources of the world and contribute to the problem, all the stuff like that. That particular reason for not, having kids and passing on your gene pool and stuff like that. I never understood that. I never thought that was a good reason to do so in particular. But there's definitely people who think that way and they live their lives that way. But I never believed it myself.
Yeah. So someone, like I've already mentioned a lot about Elon Musk, he is against longevity research, but he has this stance where overpopulation, he thinks it's a myth as well, and he doesn't believe in it, and he thinks that population collapse is a much more serious issue. And he is taken up to having a bunch of kids, obviously.
Doing his part.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he is 100% right when he talks about this population collapse issue. So the first thing I want to mention is more people equals more progress. And there's actually a term that is used in computer science to describe this. It's called Metcalfe's law. And it basically means that the number of nodes that are in a network is essentially square to the amount of participants. So if you have 10 participants in a network, the value of that network is 100 because they can all communicate with each other. So the more people that we would have, you could actually just get more progress done. But not only would you get more progress done, you get better progress and you'd get it faster. So, and imagine if we had, going back to the longevity thing, if we had all of those people who made really good innovations, if they were still around, people wouldn't be complaining about them being alive. I think everyone would agree that we want these people to live longer lives, and we would like them to be around to continue making improvements. And you never know who is going to be the person that could make one of these discoveries. So I think the first thing to know about overpopulation is that more people equals more progress, no matter how you look at it. And that's what really matters, because as soon as we solve this aging issue, we can start worrying about everything else. We can start worrying about an extinction level event, or we can start worrying about the global warming or whatever other problem you want to tackle. But we are for sure going to be dying from aging, and that's why it's such an important thing to target first.
Yeah, it's something that I think technology solves so many different parts of this. Like I mentioned before, you'll need different social reforms. If we have 10 billion people, 15 billion people on Earth, some people say it's going to cap out at 10 billion or so. But having, maybe double what we have now will definitely, it'll depend country on country and things like that. But there'll need to be different things that come forward as far as society being able to accommodate that many people. I think we have enough land. I mean, that's another part too that people push back on. Others, where are they going to live? Or is everyone just going to? Is every mega city going to have like 1 billion people now or something, or like 500 million people? But it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, especially in America, if you look at Africa, if you look at South America, a lot of the places are either unpopulated because there just haven't been infrastructure ran there yet, or they're prime land, but maybe they're wetlands, maybe they're all these other things that maybe it's municipal laws are holding things back that just need changed. So I don't think we're running out of land. I don't think we're gonna not have enough places for people to live on. Maybe we're creating artificial islands at that point. Maybe they're doing seasteading and people are finding a place to live there. But there's always going to be people who are going to be living in the cities. There's always going to be people living in the country. There's people who are going to prefer to live on, smaller places and prefer to live on 10-acre pieces of land. So I don't think we're running out of that aspect. So that wouldn't be an argument I would say against it either. But yeah, just as far as overpopulation versus a collapsing population, that's something that I think is a great thing to bring up when people kind of talk about overpopulation, because the birth rates themselves, if you want to talk about the fertility rates, I mean, that's been astonishing for me to look at as well.
Yeah, so the fertility rates is how many children that a woman has. So ideally you have two partners, a man and a woman, so you want to have two kids to be able to replace that couple. And the fertility rates in the U.S. have been under the replacement rate, which is 2.1 for a long time now. And places like China, they have specifically put in policies that limit the amount of children that people are allowed to have. And this has reduced their fertility rates drastically. But I think this is probably the biggest piece of evidence towards that we don't have an overpopulation problem and we're actually facing population collapse. Is because how do we have an overpopulation problem if we're not even replacing the population? So the fertility rate of the world is 2.39, and that number is actually dropping, and it will probably continue to drop. And eventually it will fall below the 2.1 replacement rate, and then the world will not be growing, will actually be losing people. And the countries that used to have the worst fertility rates, like Bangladesh and India, actually have really reasonable fertility rates. Like Bangladesh is almost at 2 and India is 2.18. So these countries that maybe people would think or have an overpopulation problem, if you look just at the fertility rates, they really don't. And like we were mentioning earlier about the land, in places like China, most of the people live in, so 94% of China lives on the east side of China. So most of the people live in these concentrated areas, and the entire west side is completely open. And there's a bunch of other, like Canada, most people in Canada live towards the border of Canada. So there is a bunch of open land that we could get people to go to, and it's mostly because people prefer to live with each other. People prefer living in tightly packed areas because it allows you to develop further, and it allows you to create a society and create advancements, and also have infrastructure, and everyone has jobs, and people just live better, and they're able to help each other. But yeah,
and Peter Zion.
Go on.
I was going to say, yeah, Peter Zion talks a lot about population collapse. He studies geopolitics. I watch him time to time. A lot of interesting things, and one thing he notes here too is that even though the U.S. has 1.64 fertility rate, you need 2 to replace both people, and China 1.7. Immigration is a big factor in making sure that a population that is young and growing and can keep reproducing and taking care of the next generation, all that stuff. So in a lot of Western countries, immigration helps offset like any kind of problems with the replacement rate, because you get people coming from other places there and not just internally reproducing. But a lot of places in Asia, the population's pretty homogeneous, right? They're not a lot of immigration, and there's a big population center there. Maybe they have specific regulations in the past that prevented them from having so many kids and things that eventually catch up with them, such as China. But that's one thing that can help offset it. But if you look at the world, 2.39 and it's dropping. What happens when it goes below 2? And it doesn't matter how much immigration you have then. If we can't replace the world's population, if we're not replacing each other, that means that the race is dying off, right? That's what it technically means. So, like, I can't even imagine if we don't, the overpopulation is one thing, but the collapsing, if you're trying to solve for overpopulation, aren't you implicitly contributing to population collapses? Like it seems like you're in that camp, like implicitly, if not explicitly, when you're like trying to like change your life to fit in all these things. It's not, and the land aspect too. Yeah, I think you covered a good part of that. I don't think that I think, funny enough, maybe global warming, it's supposed to open up, if it continues and doesn't slow down and things like that in the next few decades. The northern channels, the Arctic, subarctic, stuff like that. A lot of the stuff that's hard to have maritime trade and hard to put ships through and hard to places aren't livable right now because maybe they're so cold. Maybe they become warmer. Funny enough, it may work in our favor in some of these things. I definitely wouldn't trade Florida for living in the Arctic, but at the same time, it's like, I think technology will keep pace with a lot of this stuff, and we'll be able to have fix both sides of it.
Yeah, and so the country that or the continent that doesn't really have a population, the fertility rates are still really high, is Africa. So Africa's fertility rate is 4.2, and that is a very high number. But it's important to know, this is why longevity goes into it, is as people live longer, they start having less kids. So the fertility rate in Africa used to be way higher than 4.2, but then life extension technology started going down into third world countries, and it allowed them to live longer lives, and it also reduced the infant mortality rate, which is a really, really big part about it as well. Because if you have 6 kids and 4 of them are going to die, you need to overcorrect and have more kids. So these changes in population have occurred first in the first world, and then they occurred in places like India and Bangladesh, and now eventually over decades from now you'll see this happen in Africa, in my opinion. As the more infrastructure gets built, the fertility rates will definitely be going down as people urbanize. And that's the other thing, that's kind of a self-balancing system. So as the population grows higher, people turn to urbanization where they start forming cities. But as people move into cities, they have less children. So it kind of balances itself out. And this is why, if you really look at population projections, you will see a lot of the times that it caps at around 12 billion people, and then it starts to fall off. So, yeah, I think urbanization plays a big role into how the fertility rates are going to be in the future.
For sure, yeah. I mean, new therapies, treatments, contraception, just wiser. Just when you don't, like you mentioned, when a lot of your kids are going to survive, you don't need to overcorrect. You can think about, you can plan to have, that's kind of like how the Western world is today. Like we kind of almost overcorrected in that way. And a lot of places, Japan's having fertility problems, in China too, because the parents are working so much and you don't have time to, have kids. So you're much less incentivized to do so. And if that keeps happening over a long period of time, you start, getting the lower numbers that you don't want. So in the third world, especially, just giving people, quality of life that allows them to expand beyond just reproducing and making sure that that lives on, and overcorrecting that way, it kind of tends to stabilize things too. And then just some examples too of just like some things that can help with overpopulation stuff with tech, new technology in general, but like new machines, plumbing, different kinds of electricity, communications, stuff enables, the fiber everywhere. Maybe it'll be like wireless electricity in the future. Satellite internet is even one thing that can connect people and help people, bring them into modernity if they're not there yet. And then, like I said, making harsh or unlivable places in the middle of nowhere, whether it's in the Arctic, whether it's in North Canada, North Siberia, and the southern places too, just making those places livable, and for people to have a better quality of life and not be cramped up in the cities. Because, like I said, I think the cities will grow, but also population, if it continues to grow and we don't have collapses everywhere, maybe if something reverses, who knows when that happens, it's going to But the next 50 years are going to be very, very interesting in the world. We'll have a lot of ways to deal with it.
Yeah, and it's good to know some countries actually pay people to have children. There's actually a lot of places that have gone to this, and it's all the countries with the lower fertility rates. There's places, just looking at it right now, Luxembourg has one of the lowest at 1.34, and they pay $8,750 for a benefit for having 2 kids. So, and that's an annual benefit. So a lot of other countries have also adopted this method of where they pay people in order to incentivize them to have children. And China really
in America
screwed themselves over.
America, you have the child tax credit. So there's
exactly.
ways to incentivize people through taxes too.
Yeah, exactly. And China really screwed themselves over by placing legislation that limited the amount of kids that people were allowed to have. And then they quickly realized their mistake, and they went to a 1-child policy, to a 2-child policy, and then to a 3-child policy, and now there's nothing. And they have this problem where there's way too many old people to work. There's not a working population there at all. So I'm not sure if you've ever seen, there's a subreddit, overpopulation, and the people who are in this subreddit specifically, but I also feel like this represents a lot of people who believe overpopulation, have some pretty radical ideas against against why people should be living longer, and they really think overpopulation is a really, really big deal. And a lot of people, as a way to counteract overpopulation, that they think they want to implement these child policies and stuff in the U.S. and possibly other things, and it's just clearly not the way to go. And this is one of the things that bothers me most about overpopulation, the discussion, is because this stuff is not opinionated. It's actually very factual. You can look up the fertility rates and you can see how many kids people are having, and it's very clear that it's going down everywhere. So, and another reason that people always say about overpopulation is food shortages. It's something that I was interested in finding out, is that you can look up the reasons for food insecurity and food shortages around the world, and overpopulation is not on that list. Specifically for the people in like Africa, the food is getting damaged from all this war and famine and everything that's going on. They're not really facing a food problem because they're not able to grow enough for people. Rather, there's so much war going on that it's getting destroyed. So food shortages are not actually caused by overpopulation, especially in these third world countries. It's actually caused by the war that's going on here. And another interesting thing is, according to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the world produces more than 1.5 times enough food to feed everyone on the planet. So this is enough to feed 10 billion people, the world's 2050 projected population peak. So really the problem is not a food shortage or an overpopulation problem, but it's an infrastructure problem, and getting this food to the places where they need to get it. Because there's actually really a big problem with getting fruit and other cold food to these areas where they have to be transported through trucks, through places where they might get robbed or the food might spoil. There's a really big problem with that. So that really is where development needs to go, and people are looking at overpopulation as like it's the root cause for this, but really it's so many other things. And another point that we didn't mention that I wanted to get out of here when it comes to the land thing is that the entire population can fit into a landmass the size of Texas. This is assuming that everyone has like a small plot of land, and there's probably not much road infrastructure, but Texas is such a small part of the United States and the entire world. So if everyone could fit into a spot of Texas super condensed, if we were able to, and like China, a billion people are in, 94% of the people in China are in the west side or the east side. Yeah, we can get people to live in crowded areas better, and we can make it enjoyable and sustainable. And there can be a lot of open spots an open area, and people would still choose to live in more condensed areas because of urbanization, like I was mentioning before. So that plays such a big role.
Yeah. Yeah, just on China too. It's a very interesting case because I used to think, oh, it's so horrible. You hear if you do some research on what happens after you, especially for the last 30, 40 years before they started relaxing a lot of stuff, kind of contraception was essentially mandatory from what I can see. A lot of just cruel stuff that we just would not even think about would even happen in the Western world. But I've visited China more than once, and I could not imagine the population being much bigger, especially in the cities. I mean, it already kind of corrupted. I can see the point of wanting the population not to become out of control there, just because it kind of corrupted the whole, like, the ethics of, it's kind of survival of the fittest. You go get on a bus over there, everything you have to pay either extra for, or you have to, like, that's why there's no queues. I mean, there's all kinds of, like, social and cultural issues that are just not positive ones over there that came from, just so much population already. So I can see how, the government kind of, back then they saw this ahead of time. Oh, we need to do something. We need to put limits on it. How do we enforce those? Oh, let's do all these other things. But I think the biggest problem with that is it just happened for too long. Maybe instead of it happening for 40 years, it should have happened for, 10 or 20 years. So then the population could rebound and things like that could happen. And another result of that in the cities, too, is just so many people, all the jobs go into cities. I think if there were more bigger cities in China or more high-paying jobs in the country where everyone didn't have to go and make, mega cities like there are now, that wouldn't have had the effects that it has either. And people could have stayed back in the country. They have more land. They have more, incentive to have kids, and they're not working 80-hour weeks, stuff like that in factories like a lot of them do. And they travel back and forth on trains. I saw, a bunch of documentaries and stuff on that too.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a complicated thing. It's more than just, they should have never put population control on. It was kind of like they should have did it with a more surgical and like planned way out and stopped it sooner. I think that would be the best. That would have turned out a better result.
Yeah, definitely. And in the U.S., another contributor to the population problem is poverty. So people living in poorer areas of the country, and that's not an overpopulation issue. That's kind of just like an environment issue. So things like that can definitely be solved and can ease this problem, because really what we need to strive for is a sustainable population. But it's my belief that we should allow as many people as we can be born. If you want to bring more life into this world, you should be allowed to do that, and that life should be allowed to live for as long as they want to be able to live. And eventually, by the time we actually reach these maxes and the population and these limits, hopefully we have developed, like Elon Musk wants to go to Mars or whatever, to try to get more people, and maybe you'll have redundancy and you'll have two populations. So hopefully in the future we're able to just keep expanding and get hundreds of millions of people would be ideal, and just have infinitely more progress. That would be amazing.
Yeah, and just to, maybe one pushback you might get on more people, more progress is, hey, what if we just keep having kids and, they aren't taken care of because we don't have enough money through social programs and things like that? Do we want just a bunch of more, useless people in the world? Do we want a bunch of people who like the chances of them becoming a scientist or an engineer or someone pushing the world further are like 1%? Or do we want to make sure that, as many people, more people the better, but we put them in the right situation where they have every chance in the world to contribute towards the planet and make the progress happen and stuff like that. Like setting people up for success is a big part of that too, that we got to make sure happens. Otherwise, we're just going to have a whole bunch more people and a whole bunch more mouths to feed, and they're going to be contributing a fraction of what they would without the help and the setup, the education and stuff that hopefully will become very normal in the future.
Yeah,